Hello fellow sorcerers and those who are about to become one. Welcome to my first ever build video for the Sorcerer class in Diablo 4 on the Eternal Realm. Are you ready to unleash the power of Shock Hydra? This build is all about Chain Lightning, Frozen Orb, and Conjuration Skills, featuring Hydra as its primary source of damage. You'll be zapping, freezing, and summoning your way through the hordes of hell with decent clear speed and survivability. You can play this build however you like, whether you want to get up close and personal or keep a safe distance. This build can handle endgame content such as Nightmare Dungeons, Helltides, and eventually Uber Lilith. The build doesn't require any unique items like the popular Raiment of the Infinite or Penitent Greaves, making this a very accessible setup even though it means you might miss out on some damage down the line. Pushing Nightmare Dungeons tier 70 to 80 plus can be done without problems. Tier 100 is a different beast but quite achievable with this setup, as you will see throughout this video, and Uber Lilith might also be doable with slight alterations in the skills used. I'm still working on that. It's also superb for running Helltides with it to farm up on cinders and ovals from events within no time. Thanks to our lightning spears, enemies sometimes die off screen before even getting there due to the high monster density, crowd control effects, and your third Hydra doing its own thing. You don't need to be scared of visiting the PvP areas either, but don't get too cocky, as you might need to switch to more defensive skills depending on your goals. For enchantments, we are using Frozen Orb to have a 30% chance of launching a Frozen Orb at a nearby enemy without the need to equip it, and the Hydra enchantment for a 5-headed Hydra to spawn to maximize the damage output. With Hydra being our primary damage dealer alongside the other Conjuration Skills, as well as the lightning spears coming from unstable currents, we often have more than 4+ conjurations at the same time, meaning a raw minimum damage increase of 24% provided by the Conjuration Mastery passive. At this point, Hydra becomes interchangeable with the Ice Blade's Conjuration for cooldown reduction at the cost of lower damage. The core concept is to generate and collect as much crackling energy as possible with Chain Lightning and the Overflowing Energy Key passive. This continuously reduces the cooldowns of the shock skills Teleport, Lightning Spear, and Unstable Currents. You'd want to set off some frozen orbs from a distance and then either hold your position or dive deep, as Lightning Spear or Raiment, which I'm not using due to lack of damage reduction, will consistently stun enemies around you. Despite the latest patch, the base damage of Chain Lightning still feels too low to play in a standalone setup, at least on the Eternal Realm. This is where Hydra comes into play by dealing massive damage and showing us where the next enemies are. Hydra's damage seems to scale with the monster level, which might be a bug or a feature. Other than Teleport, there's no active defensive skill in this build, so it can get messy quickly if you aren't paying attention. However, you can exchange Unstable Currents for Flame Shield or Frost Nova for direct encounters such as Uber Lilith or PvP, and switch to VYR's Mastery for damage reduction. Let's take a closer look at the character items and stats, followed by the skill tree and Paragon boards. The Helm item has the aspect of Disobedience to increase our armor, focusing on 4 ranks of the Hydra, and Intelligence for extra damage, including maximum life and total armor affixes for more sustain. We use the Exploiter's aspect for the chest to increase crowd control duration and damage while enemies are unstoppable, heavily focusing on damage reduction on this piece with increases to maximum life and total armor. More damage reduction rolls might be better on this, but it probably doesn't make a big difference. Continuing with the gloves, we use the Storm Swell aspect for more damage to vulnerable enemies while a barrier is active, which we have most of the time thanks to the protection passive. Besides the 4 ranks of Chain Lightning, which is nice to have, I would focus on getting crit chance, attack speed, and intelligence on them. Alternatively, you can also play around with additional ranks of Frozen Orb. Like the chest, our pants are the most critical piece when it comes to staying alive, primarily focusing on anything related to damage reduction, max life, and total armor, together with the ever-living aspect to take less damage from crowd-controlled or vulnerable enemies. For the boots, you should invest in a pair with the Shared Misery aspect to spread any crowd control effects, for ranks of Teleport, Intelligence, which I miserably failed on re-rolling them to, and other stats, up to your liking. The cooldown reduction of evade on attacks makes this work without movement speed. Alternatively, Penitent Greaves could be an excellent option to increase damage and chill enemies further, but it works perfectly without it. Moving on to the primary weapon, the Serpentine aspect, is a requirement to get this one additional second Hydra when Hydra is active. Ideally, it also has some intelligence, vulnerable damage, and critical damage affixes. The amulet is the second crucial piece, making this build perform with at least 3 ranks to the Conjuration Mastery and Conjuration Skills. The aspect of control increases damage against stunned and frozen enemies by up to 53%. Still, it would be good to get some damage reduction on it too. On the other side, Devouring Blaze or Hoarfrost would vastly increase your damage, but there are also other things to consider, such as movement speed, intelligence, or total armor. Both rings should have an increase in crit chance, crit damage, and vulnerable damage as their main attributes. They equally contribute to the Chain Lightning portion of this build by using the recharging aspect to get mana whenever Chain Lightning bounces, and the aspect of the Unbroken Tether for it to chain for additional times. Last but not least, the offhand should have the aspect of Frozen Orbit for a higher chance to apply the vulnerable marking via our Frozen Orb enchantment, as it will stay in place and explode 2 additional times. In this case, you want to take advantage of mana cost and damage reduction related stats. While recording this, my character had around 5,200 attack power, about 6,000 armor, and 13,300 life. Depending on these stats and the damage reduction attributes on your gear, consider exchanging Unstable Currents or Ice Blades with another defensive skill. I'm still aiming for it to become more tanky by getting at least 1 or 2 more attributes of either maximum life, total armor, or damage reduction. We don't have any Malignant Hearts at our disposal in the Eternal Realm, which is why it lacks a lot of damage compared to season-related builds, making this a much more challenging endeavor as we need to stay alive longer when encountering enemies. I've no doubt that this build would significantly benefit from hearts like Omnipower, Barber, or Talrasha. Try it out if you are currently playing in the seasonal realm. It's time to take a look at the skill tree. Starting from the top, it doesn't matter which basic skill you choose as we won't equip it. I went with Firebolt since I used it while progressing, and it could still be a viable enchantment replacement for Hydra for a potential increase in damage reduction when enemies are burning. We put 1 point into Frozen Orb with the Greater Frozen Orb upgrade to make enemies vulnerable. Remember, we use this as one of the 2 enchantments, and even though the chance for triggering the vulnerable effect is only at 30%, the aspect of the Frozen Orbit on our offhand will almost make this always trigger. At least 1 point needs to go into Chain Lightning with the Destructive upgrade to form a Crackling Energy. With the Unbroken Tether aspect on our ring, we are also increasing this chance of generation. We get 5 due to the additional ranks attribute on our gloves. Since mana generation is decent with this build, you should take advantage of Elemental Dominance, ideally putting 3 points into this one. As mentioned earlier, this build is not using any defensive skills besides Teleport and the Shimmering upgrade for 30% damage reduction for 3 seconds after using it. However, if you feel too squishy, you can swap some points from the Conjuration or Ultimate skills to Flame Shield or Ice Armor. Many skill points go into the Conjuration section. Thanks to our gear, we get the maximum of 12 Hydra ranks with Summon Hydra for additional burn damage. 1 skill point goes into Ice Blades with the Summon upgrade for cooldown reduction. And 1 more into Lightning Spear with Invoke to continuously stun enemies around you. With 6 ranks in total in the Conjuration Mastery, 3 coming from our amulet, we receive a multiplicative damage increase of 6% for each active conjuration. We put 1 point into Align the Elements to get access to the Mana Shield passive, which gives us up to 21% damage reduction for free, and we should put as many points as available into the Protection passive for constant barrier uptime. No Mastery skills are used, but we still want to get the increase in critical strike damage against burning enemies with Devouring Blaze. With Static Discharge and Invigorating Conduit, Chain Lightning constantly keeps the Crackling Energy spawning and the mana flowing. In the Ultimate section, we want to maximize our damage further. First, we invest 3 points into the Hoarfrost passive for more damage to chilled and frozen enemies due to the Frozen Orb enchantment. 1 point each goes into Fiery Surge and Endless Pyre for mana generation and more damage to burning enemies. Next, we use Unstable Currents with the Prime upgrade for more Lightning Spears and attack speed. After that, we go with Electrocution for less damage from enemies struck with lightning. And finally, we wrap it up with Overflowing Energy as our key passive for cooldown reduction of our shock skills, which is why you should try to collect Crackling Energy whenever you can. Now let's take a look at the Paragon boards for this build. All glyphs are maxed out at level 21 for maximum effect. In the first board, we use the control glyph with damage to crowd-controlled enemies and increased X% damage to slowed, chilled, stunned, and frozen enemies. The second board is Burning Instinct. Its legendary node increases burning damage based on our critical strike damage and intelligence, making the Hydras as strong as they are. The Destruction glyph is used to increase our critical strike damage, and we grab 4 of the 6 available rare nodes for damage to burning enemies and damage reduction. The third board is Frigid Fate. We don't need its legendary node, but use the glyph and rare nodes for an increase in vulnerable damage thanks to the Tactician glyph. We continue with Static Surge, where we also skip the legendary node. I'm kind of torn on whether to use it or not, and I'd say it depends on your gear and playstyle. The board gives many intelligence points for the glyph socket, so we use Conjurer for more conjuration skill damage and duration. And since we stun enemies a lot, thanks to our lightning spears, this board greatly boosts our damage to stunned enemies by picking 4 rare nodes. The fifth board is Icefall. Again, we won't make use of its legendary node, but want to give more damage to chilled enemies and reduction from them. We use the Exploit glyph for more vulnerable damage. The sixth and last board is the Enchantment Master, again without using the legendary node, but to bump up our non-physical and overall multiplicative damage with the Elementalist glyph. Since we use 3 elements, fire, cold, and lightning, we get the maximum benefit from this glyph. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it. I appreciate your feedback on what I could improve in future videos. If you have any questions, please leave a comment, and I'll try to answer as soon as possible. Thank you, have fun, and see you next time. Goodbye.